everyone. This is Doug Campbell-John, and welcome to this week's episode of Revenue Renegades. This week, I am blessed to have Tamar Yehoshua join us, the former president of R&D at Glean, who is now advising Glean, formerly the chief product officer at Slack, where we first met. In between that, she worked in venture at IVP, and so much more. But welcome to the show, Tamar.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to see you again.
Great to see you. So, you had this really interesting kind of journey where not only have you had amazing roles at a place like Slack and Google and other places, but you then spent a bunch of time diving deep in IVP into AI. And I remember talking to you about like you were really exploring the entire landscape of who was doing everything. So I'd love to hear, first of all, what were some of the things that you took away from that time at IVP? And then what made you go to Glean?
Yeah, it was a really interesting time to be in venture. So I left Slack and was a venture partner at IVP, and right when AI was really taking off,
Oh,
when ChatGPT had launched and everyone was using OpenAI's APIs, and nobody knew quite what to do with them. But there were all these startups, as people were calling them, wrappers around OpenAI that kind of came and went. And then there was all these infrastructure players. So I had about 6 months where I met with not all, but a lot of the different startups. And and you could kind of get a sense of who you think has some staying power and who doesn't, where the hype is. But what was very, very, very clear was that AI was real
right.
and that the technology was really a game changer. And I was at Google. I worked on Google Search before Slack, and I was at Google when Transformers came out.
Yeah.
And I was there when we started shifting a lot of the Google Search stack to ML. And so you kind of see this transition, but nobody believed that generative AI would be as good as it is. So that was just really amazing and eye-opening. And then I knew Arvind Jain is the co-founder and
Sure.
CEO of Glean, and I knew him back from my Google search days. So he was one of the first Google search infrastructure engineers, and I worked on search features. So we had overlapped in a code yellow for performance on the search results page. And I remembered meeting him, a real technologist. And then he left Google and went to Rubrik, where he was co-founder, and then left Rubrik to found Glean because he was looking for an enterprise search solution and there were no good ones out there. And then when he was at Glean, so when I was at IVP, I kept in touch with him. Actually, Slack Fund was one of the first checks into Glean. And so I had been meeting with Arvind on Glean, and so I'd kept in touch with him. I knew a bunch of people who worked there. And when they were raising their Series D, I think it was, C or D, IVP invested, and I was on the deal team for the investment. And for people who are familiar with how venture capital works, when you're on the deal team, you go really deep. You look at every metric. You do customer calls. You meet with the executive team. And my role on the deal team at IVP was to tell the venture partner, the general partners, search is hard. It's easy to build search that doesn't really work that well. It's really hard to build search that really works. And as I went deep, I'm like, wow, they built something great. But what really convinced me was the customer calls.
Uh,
Every customer call, people are like, I don't know what I did before without Glean. It's changed how I work. Like the customer love was frankly a little reminiscent to the early days of customer love from Slack.
oh,
And so we invested, IVP invested, and after the deal closed, I joined.
that's fantastic. What did IVP say after you were like, "See ya"?
They were thrilled. They're
Okay,
like, that is like, if you're going to be a venture partner, what they want is for you to join one of their portfolio companies
right.
if you're not going to stay. So I've kept, I stayed a venture partner. They've been like so amazingly supportive.
That's fantastic. So, I've heard, Glean aims to be kind of Chat GPT for organizational knowledge, right? And now we're living in this world where suddenly you're seeing a lot of, MCP interfaces to lots of different systems. So why isn't the Chat GPT for organizational knowledge just Chat GPT?
So let me give a little bit of the arc of Glean. So Glean started as enterprise search, which is ingesting all of your knowledge from all of your SaaS applications. So
Yep.
be it Salesforce, Jira, Slack, Google Docs, Microsoft. It was really the first one that, because if you think about previous technology waves, before everyone had APIs and before everything was in the cloud, it would be hard to build that. But what Glean did that was different wasn't a federated search across. It's they built an index. So think Google search, but
Yep.
for your organization. So take everything, crawl all of the content of the organization, put it in an index where you can actually serve the best knowledge. What's different about federated search, if you use federated search, you're depending on the quality of the search of each of these applications, and then you can't really have a heterogeneous search across. So
Right.
when Glean built this index, a lot of the quality of search depends on having that information, getting the permissions and the security right, and also the ranking. And the ranking is dependent on all kinds of signals. So if you think Google search for consumer, you have signals of the billions of people using it. In the enterprise, you have signals of like, oh, I know what Doug does. I know what your department is. I know who you report to. I know who your peers are. I know who's in your team. So if you ask for an onboarding document, I can see which onboarding document people in your proximity looked at. What did they relevancy and recency? What did they look at most recently? And if there's somebody else in marketing that has great onboarding documents that get that have a lot of activity on them, but not from your team, it's not going to give you back those. So getting this relevancy right, getting the ranking right when you're in an organization of 10,000, 20,000 people and we have customers that have over 1 billion documents. That's hard. At this scale, dealing with the permissions, the security, the deployments, the understanding of that information. So that was like 5 years of enterprise search.
Got it.
And then uh, ChatGPT comes along and we have an assistant. And then when the assistant comes along, everybody started talking about RAG. And RAG, what is RAG? It's retrieval. Retrieval is search. So
Yep.
it's the core, the RAG engine that powers a lot of these systems is search. But we've been working on enterprise search for years and really honing these signals and how to get that relevancy right. So then you take the LLM and you connect it with the RAG system that we had built at Glean, and you get highly relevant assistant. So then if you say, build me an onboarding plan for my employee, it's going to not only find you the right documents, it's going to have everything up to date. It's going to know who you should meet with. It's going to know what YouTube videos you should watch on the company because it also integrates with web search so you can get external data as well as internal data. So this is kind of the evolution of the assistant. And now we have a whole agent framework, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But the agent framework allows you to build agents on top of your corporate knowledge. So this is how Glean differentiates, is the quality of our search and bringing it all together to be able to be, we call it a knowledge graph of your organization. So we understand what projects are you in your organization, not just the people, but the projects, how they relate to each other. So it's just much richer and much higher quality.
That is a great explanation, and it explains why you can't just suddenly have an MCP interface to all your corporate systems and expect it to work in ChatGPT. Yeah.
And we do, and we launched MCP integrations. You can call Glean through MCP, we can call other agents through MCP. But yeah, if you just federate a bunch of MCP connections, you will get something back. It
Yeah.
just won't be high quality.
Right, and also just the privacy stuff is so core to that because the last thing you want is somebody searching and saying like, what's the layoff list or what's the list goes on where can get gnarly very fast.
It's so I th it there's some great articles floating around about and I love MCP. I think it's a great solution. I think the industry is really adopting it, but there's some really glaring security risks
Right.
with it. And
Yeah.
so you can't just plug it in and cross your fingers. You have to really understand what you're doing and understanding permissions of the different SaaS apps. So we understand the permission hierarchies of all the SaaS apps. So if you ask for, to your point, the layoff document, you're not going to get it unless you have permission. But so the first thing when we deploy Glean somewhere, the CISO or the CIO is like, wait, what? You're going to let any employee find information they have access to? But wait a minute, I don't know if all my documents are locked down correctly. Is that layoff document, does it have the right? It's like security through obscurity. So how do you make sure? So we also have built all of these tools for sensitive content reporting. So we don't only rely on the permissions of your applications because they might be wrong.
Yeah, in some ways, I think it almost seems like it would be a brilliant audit tool for the CIO to walk in and be like, "Okay, what is exposed that I don't have the familiarity with?" Because we dealt with in a company I was at, years ago, we were doing this data loss prevention, company, Vontu, and
Uh,
and again, like most of the stuff that happened, we often said we stop stupid, right? It's not a malicious stuff. It's somebody going like, "Oh, the VPN's too hard to figure. I think I'll just email the entire employee list to my Hotmail account so I can work on it over the weekend, right? And stuff like that.
Tons of examples we have of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So I'm old enough to remember, Google having appliances because they were going to solve all the enterprise search stuff with boxes, and obviously that is not the case anymore. But I'm curious, why do you think Google didn't solve this problem?
I think they didn't care enough. So for a hot second, I owned enterprise search in the search team, and it just the, uh, DNA of the company's consumer and the business was so huge. So even if you're making $100 million off of enterprise search, it's
Right.
like a blip. If isn't something isn't a billion for Google, it doesn't count. So I just think it wasn't the DNA of the company. And to do it right, how Glean is doing it, all of the security and permissions and deployments and where's your data, it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And you have to be really committed to it. You have to understand the enterprises. You have to do your SSO and your regulations and your HIPAA and your FINRA. And like, having worked at Google, when I joined Glean, I was like, they're just, I mean, they've gone really far with cloud now, which is their
Yeah.
first real enterprise offering, which is great to see that they've accomplished that. But I just don't think that they cared enough.
Yeah. That's fair. That's very fair.
Well, and
Um,
also taking that further, there were a lot of enterprise search solutions that never really took off.
right. Right. I remember a lot of roadkill, and folks who were going to suddenly take on Google in various ways, right? Or tackle that problem.
Yeah.
And why do you think they failed?
I think 2 reasons. One, some of it was too early. If the SaaS apps didn't have the APIs, they couldn't get you can't get the
Right.
data, and at this point, they all have APIs.
Uh-huh.
That's one, and then the second is it's a hard problem, and you have to invest a lot of infrastructure. So people tried to do it, "Well, I'll tackle the hard stuff later and just
Uh-huh.
build a simple search engine," and the quality just wasn't good enough. So people I mean, there were search engines out there that did get some traction, they just never got enough traction, and they never tried to build a real index
Right.
and, do real ranking algorithms over them.
So you mentioned agents earlier. That's the word on everybody's tongue these days. Tell me a little bit about what your thoughts are on kind of agents and Glean's view on it.
So first of all, what is an agent? Everybody describes an agent in a different way. So I will give you my description of an agent, which is, you build, multiple calls to an LLM and to tools that will take action for
Mhm.
you. So it's not just information exchange, but it's actually taking an action, and that there are multiple tools involved that are not just calling an LLM. So a tool could be updating a Salesforce record,
Mhm.
or like answering a question in Slack. And so if you think of an agent like that, so we started our assistant would be you can ask a question and get an answer. And then with an agent, you could say, here's what I want to do in multiple steps.
Huh.
And then we will break down the problem. So you can build an agent in natural language. And then we will put the plan together, which will then say, okay, this is what you want. You want to um, briefing for a customer meeting. That's one of the most popular agents, I think, in
Mhm.
all the agent platforms.
Yep.
And so it will say, well, here's how it will break down. You'll kind of give it like, I want to know the latest about their stock. I want to know what they're talking about in the industry. I want to know who's met with them in our company. I want to know were there any incidents. Like, so if it's a current customer, are there any incidents they've reported? Are there any features they've requested? What are the status of those features?
Huh.
So you can say in natural language, and then Glean will break that down and do all those calls for you. Do a web
Mhm.
search and say, what is the latest information on the company? You can call an LLM and say, what is the AI strategy for this company? It can then go to Zendesk or Service Cloud and say, what are the incidents? It could go to
Huh.
Jira, look up the feature requests. Then it can go to Slack and say, what is the status of all these feature requests? And then give that to you in a nice summary. And you can say, create a document or send me an email with this summary, and then you're prepared for the meeting. So that's an example of so our agent platform You can use natural language that will then create this, or you can do it yourself. So you can do it just like a workflow and you can say, call this, call this, call this, do
Right.
that. So we have two interfaces to it. And then those tools can be any kind of tool. They can be a tool that we've built, as in Glean, like search the web or write a Jira ticket, or
Right.
they can be ones that your organization can create just using open APIs. And so you can create custom tools, custom workflows. It could also be an MCP call. It can be use MCP to call this other third party that has an MCP interface. So that's kind of our agent platform. And then we have, last thing is we have a template library. And so we have for all new customers, here's the templates of agents that we have found the most useful.
Hmm. I had Joe Mora, who's the CEO of Crew AI, on the
Yeah.
show a few weeks back, and I think that he had a slightly different version, which is like his there's a dividing line for him about autonomy, right? Like when
Mhm.
an agent has the autonomy to say, "I'm going to go take this and go make independent decisions or actions on that." So I think it's an interesting thing. You're right. Everybody I've talked to has a slightly different version of what an agent is, for some it sounds like a sophisticated if then statement, right? And then others it's like more like I have these things running continuously in the background and doing things for me. So I think it's very interesting. We've even thought about this in coffee. Like, do we call this workflow? Do we call this agents? Like, what's the right
Oh
terminology
my
for
god,
it?
we went back and forth so many times on the terminology because, like, agents is the lingo du jour, and
Right.
so if you don't call it agents, people are like, "Well, why don't you have agents?"
Exactly.
But there's well, with the agent, the core agent, you can build triggering. So your
Huh.
triggering could be run every morning at 7 o'clock,
Right.
or it could be trigger based on if I get an email from Doug with this subject, then run it. So
Yeah.
it does kind of encompass the gray AI definition because it can be autonomous, it can be running on its own. But I do find that in enterprises, they're a little scared to take action without
Yeah.
human in the loop. And I
Yeah.
would say that's smart
Yep.
because we're not quite there yet, so I wanna see the report before I send it to somebody. I
Yeah.
don't wanna send like, I mean, there's simple things you could send customer emails. I've gotten some very funny ones that that it's
Clearly
like,
AI
"You
generated ones.
posted on this, like, thing that has nothing to do with your job, but I'm gonna pretend like it had something to do with your job." And, they're so funny.
We're at Coffee, we're big believers in that most of this is at the co-pilot phase, not the autopilot phase. And I think that even things like, we will look at transcripts and be like, "Hey, it sounds like based on your conversation with Tamar that you might want to create an opportunity, in your pipeline for this and this, but would you like me to do that for you?" We're never automatically just doing that or updating pipeline or sending emails or taking those actions. So I think we still need human in the loop on this stuff.
How far away do you think we are from that? And do you think that you will give customers the ability to say, check these were good enough the last 10 times, just send it?
I think so. Here's my I think we're closer than we think, because and the reason why I think that is it is remarkable how quickly when I first started driving, um, uh, you know, popular at the time, less popular now, a Tesla, and it was remarkable the user interface experience where I quickly gave this several thousand-pound hunk of steel the ability to just drive down the freeway at 65 miles an hour with my hands off the wheel and my foot off this gas, right? So if I can trust my life
Yeah.
with AI for that in terms of self-driving there, I think there are pieces of this experience that you're just being like, "Yep, I trust self-driving." But I think we as humans need to see some kind of pattern recognition like, "Hey, every single time it recommends something, it's right." And so like after a certain I don't know what the magic number is, but there's some pattern recognition we have where we're like, yeah, I just trusted to do it for me automatically.
I think it has to do with the stakes too,
Yeah,
how like if you're blasting lots of customers and you get a couple of them wrong, it doesn't
yeah,
matter. But if like this is a really important customer, so I did not buy a Tesla, but
mhm,
I did yesterday buy a new car. And our experience, we were negotiating with a dealer and we're like, looking at the dealerships, do you have this car in stock and what is the latest price? And Andrea kept responding and we had a back and forth. And then somebody else sent us from the same dealership and we're like, but we're already talking to Andrea. And they're like, well, Andrea's our AI.
Oh my god.
The real
That's
first thing,
great.
and we had no idea.
Wow, that's fascinating. That's
Yes, we're like
incredible.
we both were hysterical laughing, like, "Oh my god."
Well, especially for you, like, with I mean, this is the part that I'm always amazed, like, you and I are deep in this stuff, right? How does the average, human being on the planet even have a hope of staying, current on this stuff? And they don't, right? But it's, the technology is catching up so quickly that the bell shape of the curve is coming.
They
And,
use it if it's helpful for them.
yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean, look how kids are using it
Oh, yeah.
and young adults. Um, it's fascinating. They use it so I try and, like, really try and understand how the college kid is using it because it's very, very different than how we're using it.
My son is in his 20s. It's basically become his college counselor. It's become his therapist, right? He's like, "It's better than any therapist I've ever had," right? It's better than any of the college counselors I have. He's, switched into a track where he's trying to figure out all the, kind of transfer program requirements, all this stuff, and it just like it did it in a way that no human's ever done it for him. It's amazing.
Wild.
Yeah. So how do you think so you've obviously, managed SaaS products for years, as I have, and but like how do you think about product managing AI products, and how is that different just than the traditional just SaaS products?
Yeah, it's the biggest difference is the non-deterministic nature and how you eval. My first week at Glean, I met with the head of assistant quality, and he's like, "Oh my god, we get so many complaints from users because a CIO buys a software product and they assume that it's gonna be deterministic. If I ask the same question
Right,
today
right.
that I asked yesterday, I'm gonna get the same answer." And how do you set expectations? How do you explain it? And so I think there are 2 avenues to that. One is you have to understand that when you're designing the product, and you have to build into your product the expectation setting. And how are you going to help users understand what they can do, what's reliable and what isn't, and what tools they need? And then you have to have a very different eval set and way of evaluating it. This is not QA. This is not QA where you run a bunch of scripts and you see, did this button work? Did it do what you thought? And so the whole eval framework, I go to these AI dinners in San Francisco, and this is a main topic of conversation is how do you eval these products? So I would say those are the 2 biggest things on how you're building the product and how it's different. And then there's the other things about how AI is developing, which I would say twofold is how product managers are working themselves
Uh,
using AI tools. And
right.
the other one is the speed of the ecosystem. I think you would agree that we've never seen anything like this
Never.
in how fast you churn out features. But the tools are super fascinating and how the job of a product manager and an engineer are changing with the tools, even with Glean, like with Glean, the product, in that we use Glean as product managers extensively,
Uh-huh.
and it really changes the scope of how you develop products.
Can you give some examples of how you use Glean on Glean?
So, some examples, like, for example, getting customer feedback. It used to be you had to talk to a lot of customers. Now we still do talk to customers, and it's a very important part of a PM's job. But you can take every gong call and you can ingest those gong calls and analyze them. So we had a new product manager join as a platform PM. And my first one-on-one with him, he was a couple weeks in. He said he built an agent that went through all the gong calls for the last year, said who has raised feature requests on APIs
Uh,
and what were those feature requests, log all the ones that were requested more than once, and who the Glean contact is for that person. And he said took like 10 minutes to build and run the agent. And he said that at any previous company, it would have taken him quarters to get the level of detail and the level of analysis that he got. So that's just mind blowing and how you get your information. And then other things like writing help documentation.
uh-huh.
So put in an agent. Here's some examples of Glean's help documentation. Here's the examples of the PRD that we're using. Here's some screenshots. Automate and build the help doc. So PMs hate doing things like that.
Right.
So now, you take an hour, you build the right agent, then you share it in the team, and then nobody has to write help documents or release notes. And I mean, you still have to keep your Jira epics up to date, so it's pulling the right information, but you all of this kind of toil and tactical work that would take up a lot of a PM's time, that can be automated away, so you actually have more time to think about the product.
Are there any third-party tools that you've run across that you really like in terms of either, assisting product management, or, even kind of testing, AI prompts?
So the prototyping tools.
Yep.
And they're different prototyping tools that different PMs use, like V0 from Vercel, Lovable. We just started playing with Figma Make, which the
Uh,
designers love. So now a PM wants engineers to build something, they build a prototype, and then they give it to the engineer. And then it saves all this going back and forth. So the prototyping tools, I think, is probably the biggest unlock for PMs. Everyone's dabbling with different, like, small things that they wanna use, but I think that's by far the biggest, obviously in conjunction with all of the coding tools. So we use all of them at Glean, like Claude Code, Cursor, Augment, Codium, so people can use whatever they want, and we want them to try these products and use them. I would say Copilot is still probably the biggest,
yep.
um, but, that's a game changer for the engineers, and the engineers use Glean for things like incident management, writing documentation, helping to understand new snippets of code. Here's a bunch of code, and I have to build this thing. How would I build it? So Glean is incredibly, integrated into the workflows of engineers at Glean and for our customers.
How did so one of the, my favorite phrases both for life and product management is happiness is reality minus expectations. So I think back to your earlier point of, like, one of the big user interface tasks I think that people have to do is set expectations because the problem that we find is, like, people's expectations with ChatGPT and the like are such where it's just like, "Oh, it's gonna just give me the answer. I can type anything I want into this," right? Um, and, I think the deep research mode has been an interesting user interface scheme to say, this is going to take me more than 30 seconds to deliver you an answer or 3 seconds to deliver you an answer. But what other kind of user interface examples or tricks have you seen people do well to kind of set those expectations properly?
When people see a blank box, there are two kind of extremes. Either they have no idea what to do because they're like, I have no idea how to interact with this, or they think it can read your mind and they just type in anything that, like, there's no way that could ever work. But like an engineer or a product manager has a sense of what can and can't work. And what I realized is that, like, you have to give people, like, kind of give them the path. So that was when we launched prompt sharing and saving, is that we realized that there was a small percentage of people in an organization who really understood how to prompt Glean well. And so create those and then share them with other people and make it really easy and then surface them. So if I'm a product manager, I will go in and I will see prompts that are used and were shared by other product managers. They'll come up in my autocomplete. And so they'll see them. So what we found is for organizations who were creating and sharing prompts, use of the engagement in the Glean Assistant went up, like exactly what a product manager would hope. And so that was very satisfying. But then the interesting part of that is the usage went up, but people weren't necessarily using the shared prompts.
Hmm.
It showed them the kind of things they could do.
Interesting.
So people were using their own prompts that they built and shared, but they weren't using other people's. And so I thought that was very, very interesting. Now we've moved from prompts to agents and launched the agent library, which are more complicated and more complex. I mean, an agent can also be simple. It can be one prompt, but it can be much more complicated things. And the ones that are very ingrained in the workflows um, are the ones that people are using the most. And then going to your latency, that's a very interesting one. Is when people want to do something that's important and is saving them hours, they will wait. I mean, think
Sure.
about how many times like ChatGPT errors out on you. You just
Yeah,
get an
right.
error and you have
Right.
to go back. But you're gonna go, you're gonna do it again and again if it's important enough for you. So I learned this in Google search also, that the setting expectations, if all you do is give like the timer thing, and
Yeah.
so there's something that's happening, then people will wait.
Yeah.
When it's just a blank screen and they don't have a sense of how long it takes, you know how those timers that will have like, you're like 10%, 20%, they're all bogus,
Oh,
right?
yeah. Yeah.
There's no correlation to because you're always stuck at the 95th percentile for like half the time, but it helps people in it's the expectation setting on latency, which is really, really important.
I saw, this is a complete tangent, but you just remind years ago, I saw the Eurythmics play at Madison Square Garden, and they left for their encore, and they just put up a Mac dialog box on screen with a progress bar. And just started going across the screen, and literally, like, I wish they had graphed the noise inside the arena as it got as soon as it got to 100%, lights went back on, it was the most brilliant encore hack I've ever seen in my life. So I was like, "Hmm, okay, you've set my expectations when they're coming back on stage." Um, so I love that, and I think that there are so many more of these user interface pieces. To your point, I think, people get scared by an empty box. So even like I'm a huge Perplexity user, and I love the follow-on suggestions in Perplexity, like, "Here's some other questions you might like to ask," or things like that, are just ways to keep that in that dialogue going.
Or when, in Google search, the follow-on questions that you have kind of in the middle of those that so I remember when we built that, and at first, it was like it was hard to get those to be really good initially, but there's the usage is, like, through the roof. I
Yeah.
mean, I use them, and so, again, you're absolutely right, and also feedback loops, so you can give a thumbs up, thumbs down, so, like, if it's not the right answer, you can, uh, you can tell people, and I think what we need to be doing more of is, "Not sure you got this right answer? Well, why don't you try typing your query in this way?" I think one of the things that I find the most useful in all of the AI products is asking the AI products how to write the prompt.
Yes, yes, I learned that one recently.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very good.
Yeah, we actually had a team offsite recently, and I love my CFO basically built, an app in Lovable on her own, and she basically said, "Here's kinda what I wanna build," and then she gave it to ChatGPT and said, "Describe to me the best way to go describe this to Lovable," and then she brought that over, and that just made the entire process, so much cleaner, right?
Oh, and then another trick, you get an answer and you say, "ChatGPT gave me this answer," and you put it in Claude and you say, "I know you can do better."
I love it. One-upsmanship, yeah, that's fantastic. I love it. What is the, so on that AI stuff, I think one of the things I struggle with sometimes is just, you know, as you said, because you've got these non-deterministic systems, you've got to figure out for things that you might be building in as kind of pre-created prompts. I know in Glean, a lot of that is like, hey, here's a box, right? Go write what you want. But when you're kind of testing the ability of the system to deliver good answers, how do you do that? Were those internally built tools inside Glean? Did you use off the shelf stuff?
So
How did
we
that?
built it all internally. We started with just enterprise search and built most of the team, the early team, a lot of them came from Google and came from Google search. And so modeled it after how search eval tools work. And so you can do like a side by side and you get here's from the previous um, previous release and here's the new release and then you can actually see all the queries and you can go through them. And so we built the search tools. And then when we started with the assistant, we built a similar thing so that you can run it on large swaths of queries. And then you have some automation in understanding whether they were good or not. And then you have to actually go in and look at the queries and you get all the signals. So you get kind of a debug environment where you
Mm,
can see the prompts that were going to go in and you see like the search that was used, you see the ranking signals that it got in order to get that. So we started before a lot of these tools existed, and so now you've got, like, Langsmith and Braintrust, and you've got a bunch of these most of them are more frameworks, they don't do the actual eval, they
yeah.
give you the framework and the tool, so their UIs are kinda nicer than ours,
Uh,
uh, but they don't change fundamentally what you need to do the evaluation. And then we, of course, we have a whole system we built for using LLM as a judge, which is pretty standard these days of use LLMs to validate those. You have your canonical documents of the questions that from these kind of documents that could get asked, and then we rate like what is the how grounded are the answers? Where was the answer actually in the document? So this is for hallucinations. How complete is it? How correct is it? So we have about 5 or 6 factors that we use. We actually wrote a blog post on it, but it's kind of old by now. It's like 6 months ago. Kind of time flies. But on
Right. Deep.
it's called the AI Evaluator. You could look at
Okay.
Glean's blog, and it shows kind of the concept. We've just enhanced it significantly since then.
I will definitely check that out. Yeah, we were pretty far down the road of building our own internal tool, and we discovered Brain Trust, and it was like, all right, this is most of what we were going to go build. We'll kind of use this for a while, and we're but yeah, it just that whole model. I had Richard White, who's the CEO of Fathom, on the show recently, and he basically said that yeah, I mean, like they've got a team. Like this is it. There's the a bespoke nature still to this that didn't exist before in products in SaaS products, where you're just iterating and kind of like figure there's taste comes into this, in terms of what's the right, kind of formatting and feeling of it as well as just kind of just testing all the inputs and the outputs. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of a PM's job is gonna be evaluating, and even evaluating the different models and which models are good for what, and how do you decide which model to use when, and when you're using your own models or the foundation models. It's super fascinating.
Yeah. So let's just zoom back the aperture for a little bit in terms of product management in general. You've you've managed much larger teams than I ever have, and much more complicated products. So, how do you build your roadmap? How do you think about keeping the balance between, you know, this is on fire, versus skating to where the puck's going to be, in Wayne Gretzky terms?
I feel like the biggest question I get on whenever I do interviews is how do you balance your roadmap? And now in AI days, it's gotten even worse,
Yeah.
or gotten even harder to balance. But you have to be in, especially in enterprise, you have to be responding to customers, and you have to do enough so that retention is not an issue. So you always have that side. So it's the 70-30-10 or 70-20-10 rule of like the stuff that you have to do, then the stuff that is your roadmap, and then the more innovative stuff. I think with AI, it's kind of turned everything upside down.
Mm.
And you have to make sure that you're moving at a speed of leveraging what's out there in the industry. So a big thing that we try to do in Glean is not reinvent everything. So for example, with agent frameworks, like we're integrating with all of them. We're integrating with LangGraph and A to A and Crew. We like some of them we've already launched, some of them will be launched, but we don't want to build everything ourselves. There's
Mm.
so much out there. We're building on top of Bedrock, we're building on top of Vertex, we're building on top of the foundation models. Let everyone else do the things that they're really good at, and
Mm.
then let's us do the things that we're really good at. And so that's a lens to the roadmap, which means when these new things come out, we have to adapt to them. So for example, we had our roadmap for the quarter, we had our kind of priorities for the year, and we had set what we wanted to do for our user conference. And like when we set all of our priorities in our roadmap, MCP didn't exist and 8A didn't exist.
Right.
And because so we pivoted. So I think the biggest thing is flexibility. So
Yeah.
there's some things that you need to stay committed to, like your infrastructure is just longer cycles.
Mhm.
So what you're doing to secure your data is and how you're doing your deployments, that you have to keep sticking to it. But then you need an element of flexibility. And we, 6 weeks before our user conference, rejiggered a whole bunch of stuff. And we said these projects we're going to pause, we're going to start on these. Because the good news is you can do them fast. There's enough out there, but I would say anybody who's setting a roadmap and just executing on it for a quarter, 2 quarters is gonna be going too slow, and if you don't feel like you're really upping the game all the time, then somebody else is.
Yeah. One of my former colleagues at LinkedIn had a phrase that I love called "I may be wrong, but I'm not confused," which I think was a little bit of a way of saying like, you know, with the data I have, here's where we're going. At least this is how I interpreted, but tomorrow I may 180 on that given new data, right? So I think there's an element of that in road mapping for me where it's like I have a daily stand up with my VP of engineering where we're literally rejiggering things sometimes on a daily basis. But in general, we try to say to the team, here's what at least we think the next month or two looks like this, but check in with us
Yeah.
tomorrow. Yeah.
I would say that it's, as the organization gets larger, what's hard is keeping everyone aligned on what you're thinking. And you have to really over communicate on when you change. Why are you changing? What
Uh,
is the business that has shifted? And I don't think we've done a good enough job doing that. We've tried very hard, but it's never good enough. You have to communicate so much that you feel like you've like saturated everything, and then you find some IC who's like, wait, why did we do that? And you're like,
right,
okay,
right.
I
And
guess I didn't make it to everyone.
yeah, it was one of my big takeaways working under Jeff Weiner at LinkedIn was just watching how brilliant they were at cascading things from his executive teams to senior leadership to the company all hands and just like rinse, lather, repeat. And like every single meeting was like we're reiterating the company mission and vision and values, and we're kind of talking about like what's coming. And to me it just I'm sure for him at times it felt like I'm just beating a dead horse. Everybody must know this by now. But to your point, it's probably by the time you feel that, you're probably maybe getting to enough people where it matters.
The most important people to get to are the first line managers.
Exactly.
'Cause they're the ones who are asking the questions or answering the questions from the ICs, and they really need to be bought in. But shifting is hard.
Yeah. You have speaking of quotes, I think I read this of you. You had one that curiosity beats certainty.
It's not mine, but I might
Okay.
have said
But
it.
you might have said
Uh,
it.
I
Okay.
might have yeah, but yeah, I think learning and being curious, when you're in a meeting, you wanna understand when people feel really strongly about something, understand why. Because you may be wrong, or, maybe they're basing the assumption on something that is not like, was not something that it should be. So, 100%.
Yeah, Jeff's version of that was he said, "Seek first to understand," and he was, I learned a lot from working from him in that notion of like to your point, if somebody is really, I'm like, wow, that's really, you know, outside the standard deviations of a reaction to this, that I should think about what's going on, and it could be that they have something personally going on, but it could also be that they have, reasons that they really believe that you're off track, and you should listen to them and dig into it.
100%.
Yeah. So I know we're coming up on time. I want to shift gears and ask you a few personal questions if you don't mind. So let's understand tomorrow a little bit. What do you like to do for fun outside work?
Um, so as a working parent, my kids are now grown, but whenever I would get this question, I'd always be stressed because all I did was work and raise children. It was like no time for anything else. And so now I have adult children who I love spending time with. And so whether we're going on a walk together or they come over for dinner or just I now am have a personal trainer that I go with my daughter, and he, like, kills both of us together, and it's awesome.
Bond over shared pain.
Exactly.
I love it. What's something we'd be surprised to know about you?
What's something people would be surprised for not anymore, but for most of my life, I danced.
Oh,
So I, did the, requisite in high school and stuff, and then I started dancing again as an adult when my daughter started taking ballet. And then the teacher was like, "We have a class for the moms too." And then we would, like, every year perform together. It was really fun.
so do you dance ballet?
I ballet, jazz, modern, I did a little bit of
Wow.
everything, and, I don't do it as I said, I don't do it anymore. My daughter is, like, a really big dancer. She performs salsa now,
Wow.
um, but so I love watching her perform, but I quit at some age.
No, my son actually danced, for a brief period of time professionally in ballet. He started late in life, at 15, and he'd always be trying to convince me to come to class. I'm like, "You don't have to convince me that you are the most talented, this is the hardest sport, and that I would die in one of these classes, but I love you. I appreciate what it is that you do, but no, I'm not going to join you in a dance class."
Oh, that's awesome. It's very hard.
It is. It is. So, we're both product nerds. Outside of, enterprise software, Glean, all that we've talked about, what's one of your favorite products and why?
I know I'm not allowed to say Glean, but Glean, when I was adding Glean every day, really changed how I work.
Uh,
But if I say outside of work, the thing I've really been leaning on lately is granola because I'm a big note taker and I always feel bad. Like, can people hear me clicking on the typewriter on the keyboard when I'm in a meeting and you look distracted? But I need to take it's kind of part of my routine. And so now I'm letting granola take all my notes, and it's awesome.
Yeah, it's amazing to me the one in products, this one thing can just suddenly unlock something for you. I was Evernote user for a year, then Notion user for years, and still bounce back and forth a little bit. But that Notion, no pun intended, of in granola of just automatically capturing stuff and doing such a speaking of AI, good processing, doing such a brilliant job of really summarizing those notes, having good follow up.
The summaries are good, and I love the fact that I can structure them,
Yeah,
and I can say, "Here are the things I wanna make sure you capture," and then it'll, put them into that structure. That's
yeah.
awesome. I mean, I still use Notion for organizing my notes and all that, but, um, that's changed my flow, when I'm and the fact that I can use it with any meeting.
Yeah, 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 the ability to do stuff in person as well. There's a whole conversation we could take more time and talk about privacy stuff, but, we won't touch on that stuff today, but I'm with you. It's a fantastic product. And then just finally, how can people stay in touch with you and help you on your journey?
Appreciate the question. I would say LinkedIn is the best vehicle. And whether it's about Glean or not Glean, I will always be able to direct to the right person.
Thank you so much for being on the show, Tamara. Loved having this conversation. Could keep going for hours, but, we'll say goodbye for now.
Thank you so much, Doug.
Alright, take care.